Chris, good to see you, my friend. How are you doing?
It's great, Richard. Had a week setting up the studio for the first time. I decided to go to the office and to build a video studio so we can create a lot more audio and video content. So it's been an exciting week learning new tools and checking out some new tech.
Excellent. Well, I hope some of those tools are AI. Let's jump straight into this week's news. Top stories this week. Google's made a bunch of announcements. OpenAI's made more announcements. Surprise, surprise. And of course, we're seeing a lot of funding coming into the market right now. So what are the big things that people need to be paying attention to today?
Sure. So I think the most important story this week coming out of Google is the start of their Gemini era. So this week, they announced that Bard, their conversational assistant, will now be powered by Gemini Pro globally in over 230 countries, 40 different languages.
So explain that to us, because this is not just a rebrand, right? This is not just a name change.
So it's interesting because Microsoft last year rebranded Microsoft Bing Chat to Microsoft Copilot. And You're starting to see the same happening with Google. And what we've found is that Google is planning to rebrand Bard as Gemini. And with Gemini, they're going to also offer Gemini Advanced, which will be a paid tier, just like ChatGPT Plus. And that will include a lot more features, for example, access to YouTube Music. But Google has a lot of plans for what they're calling the Gemini era, right? Their Gemini Ultra model is supposedly even better than GPT-4 that we're yet to actually confirm. But you're starting to see where they're not looking at Bard as just the experiment, as they have referred to it for the last year. They're trying to integrate it a lot more into their tools. So, for example, you're starting to see more AI capabilities come into Google Maps, where you can just ask Google Maps where you want to go or what you're looking for, and it will be able to be more sensitive to the request that you're making as a user.
Yeah, so this is probably the biggest interesting thing for a lot of people, is that Google has the ability to introduce AI into an existing platform of products that millions and millions of people are already using. Whereas OpenAI is essentially saying, hey, we've got these tools. We are not sure what it is that you're going to do with them. And so that's a different approach, different strategy. So Google has this almost like a ground up advantage where they can introduce proper application usage to the customer who's already using the tool.
Exactly. There was this debate last year as to what is the moat in AI, right? And the moat is a user base. If you already have a user base that you can introduce AI to, you're going to have the big advantage versus trying to convince people to use another tool. And so I would say Google is competing more with Microsoft. And Microsoft Copilot has been a much more practical implementation of AI than even ChatGPT. So you're starting to see where a lot of enterprise companies, it just makes sense for them to use Copilot versus using ChatGPT and a separate application altogether.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, actually one of the companies that I'm working with is doing a similar kind of thing where we're seeing the application itself be powered more by AI as opposed to, hey, we've got this cool thing called AI. How do we make it into an application? So some of the other news that's come up recently, of course, is that these tools are now slipping into Shopify, Amazon. We're seeing a lot of applications that are with these massive user bases starting to apply this AI tooling. We're just going to see more of that, right? I mean, this is going to be 2024 story. It's just more existing applications finding ways to enhance the experience of the customer.
Certainly. I think the practical uses of AI is what you're going to start seeing companies explore. Last year, you had the excitement. People were just excited about AI overall and whether or not it was going to mark the end of humanity. And so you had a lot of misdirection, a lot of conversations that weren't necessarily productive, others that overpromised what AI could deliver. But the lead up time to actually build applications that are useful in enterprises is 6 to 12 months. And so now you're starting to see companies like Amazon roll out their AI tools. Yelp is coming out with new AI functionality. Amazon's AI assistant is called Rufus. And I had no idea, but Amazon's mascot is a corgi. And apparently, since 1994, this has been the official Amazon mascot, and they have brought that name back for their AI assistant. And this assistant is going to have access to the entire Amazon inventory, and so you can ask questions along your entire shopping journey. So I'm excited to try it out. Of course, the proof is in the pudding, so we'll see what that holds.
Cool. Next big story is that we're starting to see the emergence of AI out of China in a much more kind of visible way. One of the big considerations around the Chinese approach to AI is that there was a lot of talk that the CCP didn't want AI to get into the hands of the consumer or the end user. They were much more interested in just using it for kind of like almost like a wholesale level. But we're starting to see cracks in that. Like, what's going to happen? What do you think's what's this trend look like for us?
So it's been interesting observing from the outside China's approach to AI generally, compared to the Western approach, where it's been largely driven by the free open market. China was very precise early on to say, hey, if we're going to be rolling out AI, we're going to have restrictions in place. We're going to need to ensure that we have data privacy protections. You're going to need to follow very strict guidelines. And so they have a process where if you want to have your AI publicly accessible, it has to be approved. And so far, they've approved roughly 40. And so this week, they released their third round of approvals. And so it's this interesting conversation around the Western approach, which says, hey, you know what? We're going to leave it to these companies. We're going to have them get that free rein to build and innovate and develop, and we'll figure out regulation and laws and processes along the way. Whereas China has been saying, we're going to get ahead of this technology. We're going to ensure that it is implemented how we see fit. And we'll see ultimately which approach proves to be right. But China is certainly being very methodical and equally aggressive in leveraging this technology.
Speaking of that, open source AI, right? This is the promised land, really. Tell us more about what's happening in that space.
So I honestly think this is the biggest story this week.
Right.
Two important things happened. Early in the week, Meta released their Code Llama 70B. And this is the largest coding AI assistant model that they've released to date. And what is interesting about it is that it's able to perform on par with like GPT-4 when it comes to coding capabilities. And now it's open source. So you can run this on your own infrastructure. And that has been Meta's approach overall. They're a big advocate of openness and ensuring that more people are contributing and having access to AI technology. Now, later in the week, the Allen Institute, which released their new Alma model, they completely open sourced everything. So this is a true open source model, meaning they've released the code, they've released the weights, they've released the training data. So if you had no access to an AI knowledge infrastructure as to what to build, you could basically go to their repos and get all of that information. And their approach is that we want to make AI knowledge and development as accessible as possible. And so I think this is an inflection point for the industry, for the history of AI, where the open source community is kind of putting its foot down and saying, hey, this is our card. This is what we believe, and this is what we're going to stand up for. So I think the three big players for open source, you have Mistral in France, and they have been releasing amazing models. Unfortunately, one of their older models got leaked this week in another story. You have Meta. They have been really the crown prince of AI now. And then now you have the Allen Institute with their AI2 models coming out. And so we'll definitely see the open source community continue to grow, because if you look at the compared last year, this time when companies were saying, hey, we need to have a pause on AI, this is going too fast. Fast forward a year, now you have companies open sourcing the technology, giving it away for free and saying, we want as many people to get their hands on this. But of course, the question I ask is, well, what responsibility do these companies have putting this technology out there? What safeguards do they have in place when you have bad actors that might get their hands on this sort of technology? And that has been the argument from the leaders like OpenAI and Anthropic in terms of why they're not open sourcing their AI. So we'll ultimately need to have deeper conversations on this.
That's an interesting argument. I was actually talking to the founder of Drupal the other day about this, about open source. And, think about WordPress powers, I think, a third of all websites. Drupal powers, I think, a third of all business, B2B websites. Clearly, open source works, and clearly communities can manage themselves. I mean, Drupal's been around for well over a decade. I think it's been like 13, 14, 15 years or something like that. Same thing with WordPress. Clearly, these options work. And so very interesting is when companies like Anthropic say, well, that won't work, right? That's not going to work. There is actually no evidence that open source is a weaker approach. And it's certainly, just by the numbers, if we just look at the numbers, it is actually a better approach. So I'm very curious to see how this plays out.
And of course, I think, Richard, the counter argument to that, the counterpoint is you have had Drupal and WordPress being super dominant on the web, but you've also had them struggle with security concerns where you have plugins that have flaws that get exploited. Of course, the community is great to work together to patch these, but is that a risk you're willing to take with AI, a tool that is
is it
so
any
powerful?
different for the risk of having an internal team that doesn't patch their own work? I think that's what we're talking about. But hang on, this is all about the news, not
Sure.
not minutes. Let's talk a little bit about e-commerce. There's a ton of stuff. I mentioned Shopify, mentioned Amazon. What else is going on?
So one of the interesting things with Shopify that I didn't get to touch on earlier, they're doing some really cool things behind the scenes for merchants, especially small businesses that may not have access to a lot of the marketing tools that larger companies have. Because you start a Shopify e-commerce website, you're looking to keep on doing your craft and enjoying what you do, not to necessarily run an e-commerce business that takes a lot of effort, posting on social media, figuring out marketing, writing product descriptions, the boring stuff, right? And so they're building out Shopify Magic, as they call it, an ecosystem of AI tools that can really help with a lot of these. And this week they released their photo editor that allows you to take an image and
I'm a user, by the way.
AI.
I have my own Shopify site, so I'm excited.
It's so cool because you can take this image and all of a sudden you can put it in whatever context you want. And so this is going to be great because research has shown that a product photo that's not on a plain white background tends to perform much better than
as much as 400% better. So this was the big unlock for Airbnb back in the day when people were taking pictures of their own places. They realized that was really curtailing the growth of Airbnb and the opportunities for people to use these sites. So they would actually send professional photographers to go and get pictures of these venues and these locations so that they would really enhance the experience. That was the big unlock for them. I think Shopify has made an equally intelligent choice about, hey, what is it that AI can do? We're going to see probably open companies like Airbnb start to do the same thing. Like, how can you enhance the appearance of your home? How can you, add this to your Amazon experiences if you're a third-party vendor? All of these things. I'm an artist. I'm always asking the question, how can I display and show and present my art in the best possible way? So this is a big unlock for a lot of people who are selling stuff via Etsy, via eBay, via Craigslist, anything.
I agree. And they do have their Shopify Sidekick AI assistant that's coming out later this year that is going to sit alongside you and assist you along the entire process. So I think they're onto something big. And going back to where we started, seeing the real world practical applications of large language models is where the value is. And this idea about language models allowing you to be able to speak to machines in your own language in a natural way for the machine to understand and then respond in a similar way, that is powerful. And companies that are able to apply that to a specific problem or to a specific domain, they're going to be the ones to succeed.
Totally. Okay, we got to round this out. We need to talk a little bit about ethics. We have mentioned this a little bit, but let's talk a little bit about ethics. And one of the big stories that came out this last week was putting constraints on what biochemical or bioweapon construction is allowed to happen within the AI models, like just curtailing people's use of those models within that range. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think this was a really interesting research from OpenAI, because a big concern for people was that, hey, you can use a tool like ChatGPT and ask it how to build a bomb or how to create these different bioweapons. And the response has always been, well, ChatGPT is taking information off the internet. And so somebody could just go to Google and do some searches or go to certain websites. And so doing a real world experiment to say, hey, if you had people that only had access to the rest of the internet versus those that had access to ChatGPT, is there a fundamental difference in terms of what they're able to create? And what they did, in addition to just put in these test subjects in the position, they gave them access to prompt engineers that could hack ChatGPT and create those really great prompts that allow the model to give responses that it's not supposed to give. And so what they found was that there wasn't a statistically significant difference, but the important thing that they were trying to figure out is how they could measure risk. Because right now, ChatGPT isn't necessarily very dangerous, but as the model becomes more capable, they need to have a way in which they could say, okay, this model is super risky, and they can only do that by starting today, figuring out what they need to be tracking, how they need to be measuring risk. And this was a really good experiment for that. So kudos to OpenAI for taking the time to not only do this, but to publish it and to be working on this path.
Excellent. Good. Okay. Last segment of the day, money. Okay. Money is flowing like crazy into AI right now. Who is getting funding? Why do we care?
In terms of startups, lots of fun startups that we're seeing raise money. We have the first, a new AI unicorn, Data Snipper, and they're an accounting AI software tool that brings AI into Excel. And I love this because it shows that if you meet people where they are, things will be easier. Rather than them building a new AI tool, they simply said, hey, how can we bring AI capabilities into to Excel?
It'll be interesting to see where these guys go, if they end up being acquired, or whether those people that are using tools like Sheets or companies that are like Google and Microsoft say, you know what, this is just a feature. This is not a company. We can just add this.
Exactly. We had Wondercraft, and it's a small company. They raised $3 million. It's amazing, right? So Wondercraft is this tool that allows you to take a blog post and automatically create a podcast. They're using 11 Labs voice tech on the back end. But
very cool.
This is the sort of innovation that I think excites consumers, that solves a practical problem, creating
makes
content,
my life easier,
making it more accessible, right? So we saw that. Chips are a big deal right now. So you had Rebellions. They're fabbing a new type of chip. They raised $124 million. They're out of South Korea, and what you're starting to see is this idea of sovereign AI, where companies and countries don't want to be necessarily super dependent on the US or on China, and so they're starting to invest. And I think that's one of the advantages of the moment we're in now, where you're starting to see so much focus that you're seeing innovation from all corners.
Germans are in on the action as well.
We have Semron working on their own chips that helps with heat, with energy use, with cost, because right now it's about optimizing the infrastructure layer for AI specifically. NVIDIA chips are great, but they weren't designed for AI initially. And so we're seeing that. And then the last company I'll want to touch on is Codium. And they raised $65 million Series B for a coding AI toolkit. We covered a whole lot more companies. I think we have close to 10 companies this week that had massive rounds. But for more
everything's on the website.
Jump on the website, and we'll be sending out our weekly newsletter tomorrow. And that will have today's news. We have some breaking news that we're going to be adding to the website today. So definitely subscribe to the newsletter if you haven't. But I'm excited. I think this modality of doing a weekly chat, I'm just kind of talking through the news,
and maybe
it's
just
going to be a lot of fun.
Explain to the listeners like the difference between a regular subscription and a paid subscription. What do they get?
Sure. So if you're looking to level up on AI, you can certainly go to Maginative.com. You can become a subscriber. We have subscribers from all over the world, over 240 countries, from Fortune 500, Fortune 300, Fortune 100 companies, that are all coming to Maginative on a weekly basis to learn about the technology, the space, the people, the companies. If you're looking for insights, you want to subscribe to Maginative Pro. And with that membership, you're going to get access to additional analysis each week. But we're also going to be recording special conversations with our guests. And so you can look forward to that. And we're going to be producing more AI tools and resources for that community. That's a great way for you to support us and the work that we're doing. So we'd appreciate anybody who is subscribing to our Pro accounts.
That's right. Awesome. Well, lovely seeing you again today, Chris. We'll see you next week.
Always. All right, Richard. Have a great weekend.
Cheers, mate.